Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 19th of May, 2025, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Delighted to have Ben Rubin with me in the studio. And we're also joined by Diane, Rasmussen, McAdie from the north of England. Well, we've had a challenging day here in the UK column, and finally the technology is doing what it should do. So we're delighted to bring you the news. And I'll just say straight off that as we've come live with you today, of course, the reports are coming in of Keir Starmer's successful negotiations with the EU, and I'm sure Mike will cover these in detail on Wednesday, but just as a snapshot, there's been a deal agreed on fishing, which is going to allow the EU to stay fishing UK waters until 2038, so that's obviously a win for the European Union. There's going to be some slight adjustments on checks on farming food products going to the EU, so that smoothed the path for Keir Starmer to be back with his friends in the European Union. But the critical thing, which the whole UK column team have been watching, is what was going to happen in relation to defence and security. And well, no surprise, a new security pact has been agreed. We haven't got the details of that yet, but apparently Keir Starmer is very excited because it's going to give UK firms access to 150 billion defence and security loan fund. So we can't do any of this stuff ourselves as the UK is a nation state, but luckily we can continue to feed off EU funding. There's been a deal done over carbon, and that will effectively put a joint EU-UK plan in place for carbon taxes. And the last thing is that passports, they've been working on that to improve access with e-gates for those travelling to and from the European Union. And a lot of people will be very excited that they're also making it a little easier for pets to travel. So not sure what your reaction on that is, Ben, but for me at least, it's EU military unification, which is the key thing. Now, I know this has been discussed by the UK column team over the last few days, but let's put on screen the key slide here, which is where people need to go if you're going to see the chronology for the rise of the EU military unification plan. And it's only the UK column that's had that detail on it. Now, before I knew what was actually going to appear in as a result of the joint Starmer EU talks. This was my proposed first slide for today, so I think I got it pretty right. I called it the fishy smell of UK EU military because, of course, everything else in this deal, to me at least, seems to be a smokescreen to detract people away from this critical issue of unification between the EU and Britain in defence and security matters. Now, everything else, I believe, is a sideshow. So to concentrate on fishing, that's a high-profile and very emotional subject for many people, like rubber boats crossing the channel. So into the frame comes fishing. And then, of course, we've made it easier for pets to travel. So a lot of smokescreen there, but the critical thing is what's happening behind the scenes with this military unification. Now, I'm just going to move on a bit because, of course, the other thing that's been happening at the moment is that we've seen the reports of the arson attempts around Keir Starmer's property and a car that he sold a while ago. Well, we now know that one of the perpetrators is actually Ukrainian. And I'm going to say, Ben, to me at least, it seems that there are huge questions to be asked, because if we have now allowed 600,000 Ukrainians into the UK with virtually no security checks, what are we dealing with? Is this a disgruntled person? Some people are suggesting that one of the individuals was a rent boy, whatever that may mean. But is this somebody who feels that if they've been wronged, they're going to carry out criminal action in the form of arson? Or is this an individual perhaps controlled by by the Ukrainian state, who has been meddling in high-level British political spheres? We've no way of knowing.
But you certainly knew where Starmer lived.
It's quite remarkable, that
isn't it?
He knew where he lived, and it would appear that he knew a car that Starmer had owned and recently sold. But who is this man? And why should we trust him simply because he's Ukrainian? And if we can't trust him, what do we say to Starmer's government that, of course, is continuing to allow people in from Eastern Europe without any appropriate checks? I think this is a very dangerous situation. Now, alongside Starmer, let's have a look at this. Basically, if I just pop this one up on screen, this was a Sky report here, fairly low key. But what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about a UK Reaper drone that was allowed to kill an individual in Aleppo. And let's see whether we can bring in a bit more detail here. So this was the key headline: a UK conducted fatal drone strike, confirmed for the first time since Starmer became Prime Minister. And I've just taken a little bit of the text because I want to discuss part of this. The UK mission to combat ISIS is known as Operation Shader. It was something that Sir Keir Starmer said should continue when he became Prime Minister. However, the operational decisions are made by the military, and Number 10 would not have signed off on the strike. Now, I find this particularly interesting, and I'm going to look to you again, Ben, because the military, if Keir Starmer wasn't aware what was going on here, how are we actually conducting our overseas affairs? Who was actually making the decision that an individual was going to be killed on foreign territory? Some would say murdered, and I think there's a lot to be said about that. Who was making the decisions? How was it that Starmer was in no way involved? And was this an attack as part of, well, what was it? We're not at war anywhere that I'm aware of. So what actually was this?
And is he accountable for anything as Prime Minister?
Is he accountable? A summary execution is how this seems to me. Now, remember what has taken place. That drone has to have the full level of support around it. It has to be launched and flown, and then a decision was made that a missile from that drone was going to kill an individual, claimed to be Daesh. But we have no evidence, we have no information in the public domain about what was happening. Now, let's also, while we think about that, have a look at this headline from the Jerusalem Post from a day ago. It says that Syrian Defence Minister General Kazara met with an official British delegation led by, quote, political advisor Charles Smith. Well, I was very curious about this. They posted another picture of this man. And I'm going to ask the question, who is exactly the political advisor Charles Smith? I can't find any easy information on this man or who he works for. But now apparently we're not conducting overseas negotiation with accountable diplomats. We've simply got a unknown political advisor. So if there's anybody out there who knows this man and what he's about, I'd be very grateful and I'd like to know. Now, this event was also repeated in the Media Line, another Middle East newspaper. And my point here is that virtually nothing has been reported in UK. So to find out what's going on overseas with an unknown political advisor, we have to look at foreign news outlets in order to glean any information at all. So the public wasn't told any of this in a move unprecedented since the outbreak of the Syrian war. Syrian Defence Minister met Thursday with an official British delegation led by political advisor Charles Smith to explore ways of supporting the reconstruction of the Syrian army and enhancing stability in the country and the broader region. And the Ministry of Interior said in a statement that the delegation discussed avenues of support for the Syrian military with the Defence Minister and other related matters. And if I just carry on there, apologies for the slight overlap of the text. The meeting addressed opportunities for technical and military cooperation and mechanisms for developing the Army structure to meet modern challenges. Both sides emphasised the importance of continued dialogue in facing mutual threats, particularly terrorism and border security. And a source in the Ministry of Defence, I believe that's the Syrian Ministry of Defence, told Media Line that such meetings may pave the way for broader agreements involving humanitarian security and potentially economic cooperation. With worsening living conditions across Syria, the country is in urgent need of external support to rehabilitate its core institutions, starting with the military. Now, on Friday, Patrick Henningsen put out some truly appalling video of summary executions inside Syria, and quite rightly pointed out that we now had terrorists running the country, running Syria, and we have unaccountable British political advisors in negotiations. Meanwhile, the British public is kept in the dark. Think what that means. And if we want to understand how Keir Starmer sees himself as this goes on, let's just have a look at this little video clip from his Twitter page. There is no dialogue, only music, but let's watch it. Well, that was completely unedited, so Keir Starmer thinks he doesn't even need to speak for the wider British public to understand his power and his omnipotence. And essentially, there he was on the international stage conducting his business to his entire satisfaction, whilst the public in UK are absolutely kept in the dark. I'm going to say Tony Blair, dangerous Prime Minister, Keir Starmer absolutely following in his footsteps, and of course the death and carnage continuing across the world. Ben, these people are out of control. This isn't democracy.
This is absolutely not democracy, although, of course, it's all being done in the name of democracy, or liberal democracy, as I'd like to reinforce to you, which I interpret as meaning we can do whatever we want if enough people go along with it. And that's exactly what you've just described. And that all comes down to two things, actually, that I'm going to explore today. In this first segment, we're going to look at the narrative, the epistemic narrative that is the battlefield upon which a lot of this is being fought. And then a bit later in the show, we're going to look at the process of elections, what they call democracy ultimately, and how that's also being subverted, interestingly, by the same people. And I'm going to come on to Tim Davie, the Director General of the BBC, in a moment. But his ideas are being heavily influenced by these people, Demos, who we talk about all the time, who are very interested in democracy. They're a champion of people, ideas and democracy. They are absolutely leading the agenda. We talk about these people almost every week, to be honest with you. They're putting out an absolute onslaught of policy documents on basically a weekly basis. They are completely leading the agenda for the Labour government, but they've been doing it behind the scenes for about 30 years. Importantly, and I've brought this up several times recently, I'm going to keep on doing it because I think it bears scrutiny. They are led by this lady, Polly Curtis, currently the chief executive, former editor at Tortoise, very keen for you to think that the child sexual abuse, the satanic ritual abuse case in Hampstead back in 2015, 2016 was a hoax. We don't think it was a hoax. We think that the evidence suggested it was absolutely not that. Excuse me, I appear to have lost some stuff. Oh no, here it is. It's going to come up now. There we go. My bad. Sorry about that. We spoke about this report about a month ago, Epistemic Security, fortifying the UK's information supply chain to tackle the democratic emergency. This is all about narrative reinforcement. A lot of that related to local newspapers, the local media ecosystem. We talked about the Public Interest News Foundation, which Polly Curtis is a trustee of, but it also related to the BBC. And she was very excited last week to hear that the epistemic security language was being echoed in a speech that was made by the Director General. He was making the case for journalism in democracy and using the language of epistemic security as set out by Demos. So local journalism, space for civic debate, and a shared national narrative. We are lucky to have the BBC. I wonder who we is in that context. I don't think the British people are lucky to have the BBC at all. She was referring to this speech. So this was delivered by Tim Davie, Director General of the BBC at the Lowry Theatre in Salford. The BBC, a catalyst for building trust. We'll provide a link. I suggest going to read it. It gives some fantastic insight into their strategic direction and really what they think about themselves and where they want to take the institution to over the coming years. So just a few choice quotes for you. We see profound changes in people's trust in the information that they receive, and their worry that those who have information are not acting in their interest. The so-called epistemic crisis. Right, there's the demos language, where many feel that there is no agreed backbone of facts upon which to base constructive deliberation. Right, so demos issue a thought piece, and then within months, the Director General is directly, essentially quoting the language that they're using. And I think you can see very clear interaction there between the ideas that are being put out by these think tanks, these unelected think tanks operating under the mandate supposedly of democracy, or certainly in the name of democracy, but who themselves have never received any kind of democratic scrutiny, and using those reports to shape and direct not just public opinion, but actually policy for government and importantly institutions like the BBC. He goes on to say that the World Economic Forum has singled out disinformation as the biggest short-term risk that we face globally. The recent Edelman Trust Barometer, Edelman is a PR firm, it's a partner of the World Economic Forum, that showed a direct relationship between lack of trust and a sense of grievance, active distrust, which creates a reinforcing negative spiral that erodes social capital, risking disengagement from communal debate, which basically means that people are checking out. They're not coming to the BBC anymore. They're not going to the mainstream media. They don't trust their politicians, and they are removing themselves from what he calls communal debate. And the BBC cannot have that. It cannot be so. They need everyone in. It needs to be inclusive in order for them to be able to continue to progress the agenda that they're pushing forward. Okay. Another quote here. So these are his prescriptions, ultimately, setting out the strategic direction of the institution of the BBC over the next few years. So there are 5 urgent, bold choices that we need to make to directly build trust. All of them not only support our central task of creating outstanding homegrown content and services, but also support the wider challenge of building trust. This is the currency that they're trading in. Number 1, the choice for the UK to be a global leader in trusted information, which is laughable.
I'm sorry, Ben, I did actually start laughing at that because, yes, it's laughable.
It is. I mean, look at what we've just looked at in Brian's opening remarks. Number 2, the choice to help support our democracy from the grounds up, right? They are absolutely dead focused on getting their hands around the political process and managing the population into the position that the BBC and the establishment want them to be. And that is the BBC's role, essentially, that he's describing here. Number 3, the choice to deploy cutting edge technology and AI to help, not harm, our children and their futures. That sounds slightly terrifying. And I'm going to come back onto that in a moment because they've got big plans for you and your family. Number 4, the choice to maximise growth in our economy by investing in every part of the UK, which essentially, from the BBC's perspective, amounts to creating content production, essentially propaganda facilities in post-industrial cities like Manchester and Birmingham. And as we said, this speech was given in Salford up in Manchester, right? So, and that's BBC, state-funded, driving investment into post-industrial cities. That's not economic growth. Right, that's not what that is. Yeah, this is a total distraction and really nothing that the BBC should be involved in at all. And then finally, the choice to ensure everyone benefits from digital transition. Right, and that digital word is absolutely crucial because essentially that's about migrating people to a system that is centrally controlled and algorithmically manipulated by the BBC and the people that are pulling the strings of the corporation. Just finally, a few points about his thoughts on children, importantly. So he's saying, imagine if we could provide every single child in the UK with proper training on disinformation. So this is what Full Facts were talking about. We covered that a couple of weeks ago, really importantly, and the Pears Foundation and other philanthropic interests. They want the BBC, they want to offer a new BBC family account for every parent of a young child, evolving at key milestones from birth to leaving school, laying the foundations for a lifetime of support from the BBC, right? So they want you from cradle to grave, essentially. You want to own your mind. That's exactly what these people are doing. And they're building the technology platform to enable it. And then crucially, again, in the context of that opening segment, the BBC is a tool of British imperial power and not actually soft power. We normally talk about it as soft power, but he says in his quote, the UK is a soft power, or should that be a hard power, superpower that leads the world in high quality media? Imagine the BBC reaching 1 billion people weekly. It currently reaches 450 million people, apparently. They want to reach 1 billion people. And that's all about promoting the agenda of Starmer and Demos and the people that control them behind the scenes, ultimately.
Ben, thank you very much for that. And of course, the other bit that's happening is the BBC says it's going to be going completely digital. It's talking about closing down broadcast services. So we'll update you on that with several things happening at once. Diane, welcome. Let's bring you in on the news. Well, no child left behind is also another part of Tim Davies' advice. What are the BBC, what's the British government feeding us while the wars go on overseas? I think it's something to do with inclusion.
Yes, thanks, Brian. Hello, Ben. It's great to be here today. I have a little bit I want to cover on the things that we're being told for the advancement of the government interest, which of course is corporate interest, which of course goes into basically compromising people who actually do need to be included and are not being included. Over the weekend, there was an event in Brighton, sponsored by the NHS, but still. It was a women's health event that was meant to be about women's health, the health of actual women. And the policy of this particular event and this group in particular is that it is only for women who, as they say, quote, were registered, observed, female at birth, regardless of current gender identity. But then what happened? There was someone who decided to attend the event, and let's see what that person did when they were there.
Hi, I'm Sarah Savage. I'm a trans woman and I'm the leader of Trans Pride Brighton. I've just been arrested for disrupting a meeting of the notoriously hateful group Sister Salon in Jubilee Library here in Brighton. I just finished a speech of defiance to the International Day of Homophobia, Biphobia and Transphobia, and I was fired up. I was walking home past the library and something went in my head. And I knew I could not let it go. So I walked into the library, I found the room where they were having their meeting of exclusion of transphobia, and I hit the fire alarm. And everybody had to leave the meeting. All of the TERFs had to file out the door while library security grabbed hold of me and pushed me around. The police were called and I was immediately arrested. Very soon after, they found out that I was staging a protest and they de-arrested me and they let me go. And I want to send a message to the anti-trans, to the transphobics, to the TERFs. I want to tell them that trans people are strong, trans people are fierce. If you wish to remove our rights, we won't let it go without a fight, without a struggle, without defiance. Trans people are fearless, trans people are strong, and we will not let this go.
So what I would like to say to this gentleman in particular is that Diane of UK Column is also fearless, and she is also a woman and was born one and remains one. They have decided, this group that he runs called Trans Pride Brighton, is that Labour MPs are banned. So much for inclusion. If you are a Labour MP, in particular Chris Ward and Peter Kyle, which we've shown here, which is on their websites, they are banned from attending the Trans Pride Brighton event, which is taking place on the 19th of July, 2025, in case anyone would like to attend. And in particular, their statement said, quote, "We at Trans Pride Brighton have watched in horror over the last couple of years at the politically motivated attacks on the healthcare of trans children, even more so as it has intensified under the Labour government. We have taken the logical decision to ban the Labour MPs from our event. Chris Ward and Peter Kyle did not speak up in defense of trans kids during the December 2024 parliamentary debate. Neither attended Trans Day of Remembrance, where we mark the deaths of numerous trans youth this year, and both appear to support the widely discredited and deeply flawed CAS report, which was very evidence-based. Trans kids are dying. Yet the National Labour Party has chosen to throw its full support behind the far-right culture war." So over the weekend, because as you said at the beginning of the news, Brian, I have recently moved to the north of England. So of course I had to go to IKEA to buy some things for my new house. So what we see here outside of IKEA, who is apparently very concerned about their ESG score and their sustainability, which is all over IKEA, including pronoun badges of the staff that I spoke to. There is outside of IKEA in Newcastle, there is a that's just a pride flag next to the UK Union Jack flag, just at the same level of height. Now in America, that would be illegal because the American flag is required to be higher than any other flag, even a state flag, if they are next to each other. Inside of IKEA, at the tills, I took a photo of these pride bags that are for sale for £1.50 if you would like to take one home with you. But in the meantime, what's happening here to people who actually do need help? Well, let's say, for example, this woman who posted on X over the weekend that she was not able to get onto any train at Liverpool Street Station because the staff at Network Rail collectively refused to deploy a ramp. And she was told that she was being rude for being told that she didn't want the lecture that he was giving her. And so we see here the breakdown of the system. Once again, people who actually do need help but can't get it for whatever reason. But we also see now, again, the government distracting us with climate finance and saying that the International Climate Finance UK policy now has gender equality, disability, and social inclusion built into it. So that is now guidance, in particular, how to label someone if they are identifying by a particular gender. And this applies worldwide, including in developed nations who don't actually follow this agenda, because all the climate finance money, as we've reported previously, is going to people who are in developing countries, and they are supposedly the ones receiving the funds. So, Brian and Ben, I'd like to get your thoughts on this, because it's very disturbing, I think, what the governments are doing and what corporations are doing to distract us, and the people who actually need help can't get it.
Diane, thank you very much. Well, for me, it's very easy. This is a calculated agenda which is designed effectively to destroy the minds of our children. And of course, we've got it coming in from two angles. We've got it coming in from the government in the form of widespread policy, including through the Ministry of Education, so it comes straight into the schools, but also hand in glove, we've got it with the big corporations, and that is absolutely part of your public-private partnership system, Ben, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's a lot of it's to do with divide and rule and sowing the seeds of chaos, ultimately, in society to make us easier to control.
Chaos in order to destabilise the country, to bring in the change that they want. And we can see that Tim Davie from BBC is absolutely on board with this agenda, and he wants total propaganda control in the country. A lot more to report on that. We'll also discuss it a lot more in UK Column Extra after the news. Now, a big thank you to everybody who supports the column. We know We have people everywhere in UK and overseas, and it's always really nice when we get letters or emails of support. Of course, we can only do what we do with your financial support. You can make a donation to assist us, or you can take out a membership, monthly or annual or a lifetime membership. And of course, you can make a purchase from the UK Column shop. We also make a special point to say that we stock Clive de Cole health products, and we do make a small percentage on those. But it is the financial support from our viewers and listeners in UK and worldwide that help keep UK Column going. And we'd say very gently, if you're watching us and you like what we do, please consider making a donation or taking out a membership, because we do need that financial support. Now, most of the material that UK Column produces is free to share. The aim is for us to get out information and facts and truth about what's happening in the world. So please do share it by whatever platform you choose, but do also remember to acknowledge UK Column as the source of the material. Now, I just want to say that Charles Mallet is the guest of Germ this evening at 7:00, and the subject is why is the Church of England investing in porn and weapons. I think this is going to be an extremely interesting interview, because UK Column has been warning for some years of the demise of the established church in UK, and particularly the Church of England. And also tomorrow at 1:00, we've got this interesting interview going out. Cornish Christians say no to Truro Diocese plan on the way. And this is the plan effectively to shut down churches in Cornwall, amalgamate the remainder under one vicar. And in some cases, there's multiple churches now being pushed under one vicar. And of course, this is not tenable, and the care of the vicar, of course, is greatly diminished for his flock within the parish. This is a deliberate policy, but the feelings are so high in the Church of England that this has to be an anonymous interview, because the individual fears retaliation from the higher ranks of the Church of England. Incredible state of affairs, Ben. We've also got this one, Diane, for you, In Defence of Libraries.
Yes, thanks, Brian. So tomorrow is International Academic Freedom Day. So if you are a member of Academics for Academic Freedom and have signed our pledge to protect academic freedom, there is an online call tomorrow evening that I will be speaking at, as well as others who are active in this group. And I'm going to be talking about this event that I will be speaking at the University of Buckingham, sponsored by the Buckingham Academics for Academic Freedom group on the 12th of June. If you can get there, it's free to attend. And I will be discussing why we need to challenge the woke approaches to preserve our libraries, which ultimately consists of preserving the past and the record of written history and knowledge and learning in the world. So please come and join me if you can in Buckingham on the 12th of June. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Diane. Now, we have mentioned this before, but UK Column has a competition here. If you go to www.facebook.com UK Column Extracts, you can find details, but it's for winning 2 free tickets for the Sound Beautiful Festival. And full details are there on that web link. So go and have a look at that. And the actual event is the 26th to the 29th of June, and that's in Wimborne, Dorset. So visit Facebook there, UK Column Extracts, and you can enter to try and win 2 free tickets. Ben, back to democracy, liberal democracy.
More liberal democracy,
manufactured democracy.
Yeah, I'm going to keep on reinforcing this, because it's important for people to understand that liberal democracy does mean we can do whatever we want if enough people go along with it. And we talked about the narrative earlier, and now we're going to have a look at the actual democratic process itself, which is also being transformed and apparently completely up for grabs. So let's head back to Demos and hear about the WAVES programme.
Our project is called WAVES. It is, we believe, the largest trial of digital democracy ever done in the UK. What it aims to do is bring people together to tackle contentious local issues and strengthen trust in local government.
At the very beginning of Waves, I was inspired by the Digital Democrats of Taiwan. They use new technology to find consensus in even very polarised topics and to use that consensus to turn it into actually new law and regulation. They showed that it could be done.
It's going to do this by using new tech and AI to create a process that will make it easier, cheaper and quicker for local governments to involve people in discussions about a specific issue, to find consensus between people, and use this to shape new decisions that are going to be made by local government to really improve people's lives.
For me, democracy means something beyond elections and beyond referenda. It means actually involving people meaningfully in decisions that really affect and shape their lives. Now, that is easy to say and it is very, very hard to do. And it's something that we have to constantly problem solve for, constantly adapt and innovate on in order to recapture what democracy really can do for each new generation.
We're going to trial Waves in 2 local governments over the next 18 months. Each government is selecting an issue that's important to them and to their public. And what we're going to do is use Waves to bring people together to work through the challenge. We'll then develop and iterate Waves through these 2 trials to see what's possible, and then support dozens of other local councils to learn about the process so they can use it in the coming years.
So Waves is about technology, but technology about bringing people together, even in polarised and angry debates. But it also means using technology for deliberation decision making. And that is about finding consensus between people, even when that consensus is not immediately obvious.
Democracy, it means everything to me. It underpins how we function well together as a society. But the problem is it's not working for people right now. People are losing trust in politics and political institutions, so we need to radically renew the way democracy is done.
So, Ben, democracy is failing. We're not going to sit back and think, hang on a minute, why is it failing? We're just going to get on and move it to a technologically based solution. You're not going to actually look at the problem, what's causing the problem. You're just going to move it on to technology.
Yes. And let's ignore the fact that 30 years of demos policy initiatives is probably the thing that's making democracy in the country break, right? And they talk about using technology to break through contentious issues, like we're going to destroy your country and you don't like it. So we're going to build this AI platform to ram you through this process of transformation that we're going to insist on. I mean, it's just ludicrous. And who's behind it? So this was Miriam Levin, Director of Participatory Programs at Demos. And she's been on the column before in a supporting role. So regular viewers will remember this image. This is from a Demos event held about 18 months ago now. You can see Miriam there on the left-hand side in the red shoes, sitting alongside Georgia Gould, who was at that point Mayor of Camden. She's now running the Cabinet Office, right? So these women are extraordinarily powerful and influential that you've got sitting in front of you here. Third in from the left-hand side in the black and blue dress, that's Lisa Witter from the Apolitical Foundation, who are currently completely transforming Cabinet Office, central government at the behest of Georgia Gould. So that's basically client and partner there. And then Claudia Chalice from Democracy Next, who was at this event to talk about new governance models that can help break through deadlocks and give legitimacy to hard decisions that require trade-offs. We can just zoom in on that. There you go. Now, it basically means our technology will force you to do whatever we want. Right? That's what these systems are for, ultimately. They want to get you to sign up to things that you would never sign up to. And they're going to use these systems to help them do that because, interestingly, if they actually tried to debate with you around facts and issues, they wouldn't be able to win the argument. And apparently that's our fault for just being intractable and men, probably. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of that stuff going on behind the scenes as well. And to kind of counter that, they're going to introduce these new systems. And that's all about citizens' assemblies, participatory democracy, none of which is actually particularly democratic, so they'll come out and talk about wanting to defend democracy, but actually what that means is these highly stage managed, manipulated and controlled, basically show elections. Like, these aren't real elections. And if we can just flip that back onto screen quickly, you can see that in the process of deliberation, which goes from the left to the right, the green bit is where all of the artificial intelligence is going to be introduced in order to control the process and ultimately to control the outcomes, right? To deliver what it is that Claudia Chalice and Georgia Gould and Demos and everyone else involved in this thing want. And what does that actually relate to? Well, here's an example. So this came out a couple of days ago. This is the MIMBY majority. So this was actually authored by Miriam Levin. This is a new Demos report. It's about unlocking house building with early and representative public participation in planning. So this is about helping the government deliver on its promise to build 1.5 million new homes in England by 2029, which means they need to build 1,000 homes a day, which I don't think that that's technically possible to do that. Certainly not from the position we're in right now. And but they seem to think that if they can just get the technology and the decision making and the legislation in place, then they can just magically create all of these new homes, bulldoze through planning legislation, completely ignore the very valid concerns of huge swathes of the population, right? I mean, that's ultimately what they're looking to do here. And we'll provide a link to this. You should go and read it. And what they're talking about is, they say MIMBY. So obviously a NIMBY is not in my backyard. MIMBY is maybe in my backyard if Demos get their hands around me and force me through one of their processes ultimately. And interestingly, in the introduction to the report, they've brought out a new term, which is the emergency crisis, which doesn't even relate to anything. This is just crisis, the crisis. Everything we got to change everything because of some poorly defined crisis that we probably have just made up. Actually, to be honest with you, ladies, who's behind it? So we've got. Another bunch of familiar faces, a few sort of niche technology companies on the right-hand side, but also New Local, who I've spoken about recently. Going to have to bring them back into the discussion over the coming weeks. They're absolutely crucial to what's happening in local government. Demos are obviously there. Camden Council, she mentioned she's working with 2 local governments. I'm sure Camden Council is one of them. And obviously Georgia Gould, absolutely slap bang in the centre of the Demos ecosystem. She was at an event last year basically saying, as Cabinet Office Minister, that when the rules at the centre are blocking services from delivering for people, we just need to change those rules. Yeah, we can do whatever we want, as long as enough people go along with it, right? You have to understand the mindset with these people. It's all being driven from here. So Democracy Next is backed by Rockefeller Foundation, Open Societies Foundation, and then the Open Societies Foundation takes us into Daniel Sachs and that whole funding ecosystem of people like this. This is Paul Alarcon, who thinks that the world was created for me. There he is. There you go, a little star up there on the left-hand side. And then just finally, who was the last guy in the video? This was Carl Miller. Really odd turn of phrase that he used there. He said, and we use that consensus to turn it into actually new law and legislation, which doesn't mean anything. And that made the final cut. So I shudder to think how bad the offcuts were. And he also said that he was inspired by the digital democrats of Taiwan. And at that point, we are straight off to Crazy Town. Let's have a look at this.
The most interesting thing in tech, I'm here with Audrey Tang, the first digital minister of Taiwan. And Audrey is responsible for what I think is one of the most profound and important ideas I've heard in AI. And it's the notion that there's a vertical race in which lots of powerful companies are building potentially self-replicating AI that will bring great prosperity and also potentially great troubles to the world. And then there's a horizontal race, a more open source, smaller communities of people, academics, tinkerers, building tools, building ethics, building systems, building explainability in different models that will then be absorbed into the larger models, and that this is the way that will end up with extremely powerful AI that is very good for humanity. And Audrey and I were talking about it today, and then Audrey added another thing which I thought was just truly beautiful, which is a prayer that she came up with in 2016 as a job description, but that also still guides her work and her thinking. And so I thought today, Audrey, you could give this prayer to this video series.
Definitely. Yeah, when I became the digital minister in 2016, in Taiwan, 数位 means both digital but also plural. So it's kind of wordplay that when we look at the vertical path, which is called the technological singularity, let's think about the horizontal path of plurality. And so my job description goes like this. When we see the Internet of Things, let's make it an Internet of beings. When we see virtual reality, let's make it a shared reality. When we see machine learning, let's make it collaborative learning. When we see user experience, let's make it about human experience. And whenever we hear that a singularity is near, let us always remember the plurality is here.
Oh, I love that so much. Profound and wonderful words from Audrey Tang. Thank you so much.
Thank
See you
you.
tomorrow.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for
Audrey,
that.
isn't she lovely?
I would just like to say, Ben, of course, a lot of people listen to that and their immediate reaction is, what utter nonsense. And yes, that may be true. However, these are the people influencing the policy which is doing this immense damage across our world and our lives. So we need to know who the people are. We need to understand the language that they're using, and quite often we need to be able to interpret that language in order to understand what they are really talking about, because they are masters, credit where it's due, at the use of language to hide what they're really doing.
And that's the top level. Yeah. Those are the people really pulling the strings, and we'll talk much more about those two in the coming weeks.
Okay, Ben, thank you very much for that. I can see we're going to have a very packed UK column extra. Diane, let's bring you back. And the subject is back on the story of those elusive chemtrails, but also you've got some interesting comment about what the BBC has and has not done.
Yes, thanks, Brian. So going back to earlier in the show when we were talking about BBC being a trusted information source, or whatever their phrase was, I want to talk about that because I did a little bit of digging based on some things that some viewers have sent me. So I know recently a lot of viewers have been in contact with me because I've been doing some reporting recently on geoengineering and chemtrails and contrails and where the research funding is going. Again, always using primary sources, not just sensationalist channels, but I'm actually trying to get to the bottom of what they are at least telling us they're doing. So some things that I got, for example, from some viewers in the past few days are some communication with their MPs. So one was back from 2014. A viewer sent this to me when this viewer was asking about chemtrails and contrails and what's actually going on in the skies. And this is directly from the letter that was sent to me, where they define chemtrails, and this is contrails. And we said, well, there's no such thing as chemtrails, essentially. But they also said, well, there are contrails, which are from aircraft that are additional water vapor, essentially, has been released by burning fuel and the mixing process, depending on the engine exhaust characteristics, which creates a plume of air. We'll come back to plumes later in this segment. And then it goes on to the next page, and it also says a little bit more about that, about what the contrails do, trying to give some sort of scientific so-called explanation about how contrails actually work. And it also talks about climate change. And one of the things that I've been seeing quite a bit is that they don't really care that much about what the content of the contrails are, which everyone knows they do exist, but what is actually being released into the atmosphere. It's more about the climate change agenda rather than what actually might be happening to human health, to people who are sensitive to these chemicals that are being released. Now, another MP that wrote to another viewer that was sent to us last week talked about contrails from aircraft, asking questions about what that meant and some back and forth. So he said that he understands that some countries have used weather modification techniques such as cloud seeding, which I reported on that recently. That says the UK does not use cloud seeding or deploy geoengineering, and then some more back and forth between the two. And the MP wrote back and said, I thought this article provided a God summary of the issues. So that was a typo. It should have said good summary, but it said God summary, which is maybe a Freudian slip. I don't know. So I looked at that article because it linked to this BBC website. And the BBC website was called Why Do Contrails Appear in the Sky? So this is from 2022. This is by a woman called Jocelyn Temperley, who is a reporter for BBC Future Planet. And she said, contrails have become an increasingly common sight. Their eye-catching presence has caught the attention of many, including through the surprisingly common belief in the chemtrails conspiracy theory. More on this later. However, it's actually their climate impact that scientists are concerned about. So again, not about human health, but the climate. So what actually are they, and should we be paying them more attention? Now, within that quote, there were two links to two academic papers. And so I followed those links to see what those papers said. And what was really interesting were what linked from those papers. So the articles that they cited, for example, the first one that I will talk about is the one about the conspiracy theorists that she mentioned. The paper is called Solar Engineering and the Chemtrails Conspiracy on Social Media. Now, this paper is very interesting in its own right. I'm not going to go into it, but it will be in the show notes if you want to read the full paper. Basically, it said that there was a 1999 online post by someone called William Thomas, which was called Contrails Poison from the Sky. And he was asking the question, what is in the contrails making people sick? Is it just water vapor or is it more? And they claimed in this academic article that it was the first to link the so-called spraying in the skies to the white lines that we see following planes. The citations were interesting within the William Thomas article. So it mentioned a U.S. Air Force report from 1996, which this article was apparently written within the U.S. Air Force, but it was apparently done as an academic exercise. There's a disclaimer saying that the views expressed in the report are those of the authors and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Air Force, Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. Now, whether or not that's the case, who knows? But it went on to say in this report that weather modification will likely become a part of national security policy with both domestic and international applications. Our government will pursue such a policy depending on its interests at various levels. These levels could include unilateral actions, participation in a security framework such as NATO, membership in international organizations such as the UN, or participation in a coalition. And then it says the paper was about what the weather modification will look like in 2025, which is a really good time to be talking about this, because then it said, assuming that in 2025, our national security strategy includes weather modification, its use in our national military strategy will naturally follow. Besides the significant benefits and operational capability would provide, another motivation to pursue weather modification is to deter and counter political adversaries. Now, this was written in 1996, 1997, so this is what they were talking about would be happening now. The article I mentioned earlier also mentioned HAARP, which is the organization in the States, and HAARP's website says that no, they cannot create chemtrails. They do talk about contrails that form behind aircraft, and they basically just say on their website that it is essentially condensation from the exhaust of jet engines. It doesn't say anything about the chemicals that are being released. Now, it also mentions a book which you can read for free on the Internet Archive called Weather and Climate Modification. This was an academic research government publication published by John Wiley, which is a reputable publisher in academia. The editor was called W.N. Hess. He is of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Environmental Research Laboratories, which was published in 1972. Within the preface, it said there is a 28-year history, remember this is 1972, of weather modification now since the revolutionary dry ice seeding experiments were conducted by Vincent Schaefer and Irving Langmuir at General Electric. There was a major upswing in the late 1940s and early 1950s after Schaefer's discovery that dry ice would produce snow in a box filled with supercooled water drops. This was called Project Cirrus. This was in 1947, was the first one. There was an article that was published in 2017 by the U.S. Department of Commerce discussing the 70th anniversary of the first hurricane seeding experiment, which is what this was, by the U.S. Navy. Also in this book, it asked 8 questions that were meant to be kind of setting out a research agenda for the next few years. And these questions were, is there a significant downwind effect from cloud seeding? Can we effectively clear warm fogs? Can cloud seeding produce severe weather like tornadoes? Remember, this is an American publication. We don't really have those here in the UK. Can we increase participation from winter storms? Can we decrease hail and lightning in thunderstorms? Can we steer hurricanes by seeding them? Can we decrease rainfall under some seeding conditions? Is it possible to understand long-term climatic changes now? So also in 1972, there was an experiment called Project Storm Fury, where they actually seeded a hurricane. Let's take a look at this from the AP archive and see what they said.
The seeding planes fly across the eye and into these clouds, seeding the supercooled sharp pressure differences in the heart of the hurricane, which produce the strongest winds in the storm. Flying a series of intricate patterns into the seeded clouds, the monitoring planes measure any changes in wind velocities and pressure caused by the seeding of the greatest storm on Earth.
Now, also in that time period, we had between 1969 and 1972, there was Operation Popeye, which was a government operation to prolong the monsoon season in Vietnam during the war, using what they called known cloud seeding techniques. And this information was released. It was originally a hearing in the U.S. Senate, which was top secret at first, but it's now released and it's freely available online, where it said that this rainmaking program was conducted from, as I said, 1967 to 1972, which employed airdrop silver and lead iodide seeding units to increase normal monsoon rainfall. But what's interesting about that is that in 1976, so 4 years later, there was a UN paperwork written up called the Convention on the Prohibition of Military or Any Other Hostile Use of Environmental Modification Techniques. This happened, of course, after this particular operation in Vietnam, and who knows what else happened. We don't really know yet. But what this said was that they were convinced that the convention should not affect the use of environmental modification techniques for peaceful purposes, which could contribute to the preservation and improvement of the environment for the benefit of present and future generations. So that's saying there, okay, so we're not going to use it in warfare, but if it's going to so-called save the planet, then maybe we should do it. The other paper, which I won't go into detail, but I just want to mention to close this out, was called The Contribution of Global Aviation to Anthropogenic Climate Forcing for 2000 to 2018. This was the second paper that was linked that I mentioned from the BBC article. And it had this little graphic here, which made me wonder about the questions of what is in the contrails, because it says here all of these different things that are in the plume composition. So this is researchers that are talking about how this is actually working through global aviation measures, and it lists a lot of things, including others. So what is the others, and why are they so worried about what plane flights do to so-called climate change, that we can promote that agenda, but not the health of those of us who are breathing the air that are being released by these particular particles? So I'm just asking the question, Brian and Ben. I don't know what you think, but I'm a bit concerned.
I think you're absolutely right to be concerned, Diane. I think we've got to an interesting stage where information about this subject is coming to the surface. And of course, it's now becoming easier to dig into it. But we've got to come back to this key question: is what is taking place as we witness every specific event? So is this happening across aviation fuel that's used by every single aircraft? Is this one problem in much the same ways that we had a pollution problem when cars were using leaded fuel? So have we got to change to aviation fuel, or is aviation fuel being used selectively in order to get some other agenda with regard to whatever it may be, cloud seeding or any other weather modification experience happening? When we see a trail in the sky, it's still difficult to say exactly what that aircraft is doing. And this is the key point. And of course, the BBC demonstrating there once again that they are only going to go so far into this subject. And if you delve in too far, they're going to brand you a conspiracy theorist. So I think the good news out of this topic at the moment is that it is beginning to break surface. And yes, we can be delving into it in order to get more evidence as to what is actually taking place. Letters, questions to your MP, to the BBC, to scientific bodies, of course, also make a difference. Let's just end by a little bit, possibly a black humour. This is another image from Keir Starmer's Twitter account. I find this one utterly astonishing because the wizards, as I've labelled them, seem to be in a remarkably childish environment, but I'm not sure where they were actually located. So draw up your own conclusions from the little logos and the icons on the front of the desk. But it would be nice to know exactly what's being said. And of course, there we've got Zelensky drawn into the inner circle, although we have no idea of this man's morality or his true objectives. But he's certainly got power because his influence is something that took over the Italian Prime Minister Meloni. Here she is in a nice little beige number, strutting her stuff. This was part of a video that I came across over the last few days. It was also saying that clearly Italy doesn't want to get near troops in Ukraine. But notice her outfit. Well, when she's together with Zelensky, it all changes, and I couldn't resist that it's definitely back to black. And if you look at Zelensky's face, clearly he thinks he's achieved something. So I'd like to know what took place in their meeting, whether it was in black or not.
Was that a pop culture reference, Brian?
It was pretty good for me, I thought.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's okay. And I'll just end that, of course, in the background over the last few days, the BBC absolutely crowing at the what it says are record losses for the Russians in Ukraine. So the BBC getting intense pleasure and satisfaction over coming out with estimates of Russian casualties at anywhere from 164,223 to 237,211. And of course, the spread there shows you that actually the BBC is pretty unsure of what the real figures are. But whatever the Russian deaths and wounded figures are for Ukraine, the Ukrainian casualties are far worse. But of course, the BBC does not want to tell the UK public those statistics because that would spoil their agenda as to what's actually happening in the war in Ukraine. Let's end it there. I'm going to say, Diane, thank you very much for joining us. Ben, thank you for joining me. We will be back in a few moments if you're a UK Column member for UK Column Extra. Thank you for joining us for the news today, wherever you are in the world. And of course, knowledge of what is taking place in this wider political agenda is the key to stopping it. So look at the people, look at the policies, listen to the language to understand the agenda. And this is the route to overturning what's taking place. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. And as I say, UK Column Extra in a few moments. Thank you. Bye-bye.